Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Today we have a lot to talk about here on the show. First up, Jon Gruden, former NFL head coach and QB guru, says that he is very much in on a sixth-round pick for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Will Howard, doubling down on his very positive draft evaluation from the former Buckeye. We'll talk about that at the top of today's show. Then later, I'm going to tell you about how defensive coordinator Teryl Austin can attack Cincinnati's offense and get this defense playing better than it did back in Week 7. And then we'll finish up today's show with a reason to hope for Aaron Rodgers to bounce back after that really putrid performance versus the Los Angeles Chargers last week. Now, before we get into the content today, I would really appreciate it if you've been watching our channel for a while, you watch our shows, and you appreciate the content we provide here for free on this channel. Click that subscribe button if you haven't already. We are only 72 subscribers away from 104,000. I'd love to get there before we kick things off against the Bengals on Sunday. So if you're somebody that hasn't clicked that subscribe button yet, and really new viewers, I'm talking to you guys, all right, all the real ones that have already clicked that subscribe button, we greatly appreciate all of your guys' support. But all the new people that haven't clicked that subscribe button yet, I would greatly appreciate it. If you click that subscribe button, you guys get free, informative, and entertaining Steelers coverage every single day for clicking that subscribe button. So what are you waiting for? Make it happen right now. All right, so let's get into Will Howard here, where former NFL head coach Jon Gruden went on Pittsburgh radio today, and he says he'll be quote-unquote shocked if Will Howard isn't a good NFL starting quarterback. That's absolutely crazy to me, man. But here's what Jon Gruden has to say about Will Howard. He says, I just think Will Howard has everything you're looking for in an NFL QB. He's got that prototype size I like. He's 6'4", he's 225, 230. He's built like a horse. I mean, he's a big guy who can run the ball. You can run the quarterback power plays and all these quarterback draws that everybody likes to run. He can keep it on the zone read. He's an accurate passer. He's a winner, man. This guy's a winner. He won the Big 12 at Kansas State, and they won the Big 12. He won the national title. He has the wow factor. He's got a photographic memory. He's a great communicator. I'll be shocked if he's not one hell of an NFL quarterback. And I told a couple of my friends in Pittsburgh, I told Omar Khan, quote, I can't believe you got him in the 6th round, unquote. So Jon Gruden still very high on Will Howard at this point in time. And even back during draft season, he compared Will Howard to former NFL MVP Josh Allen. I mean, that is incredibly high praise, and, Jon Gruden certainly puts his upside at NFL superstar as a 6th-round pick. And, the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear Jon Gruden hype up these quarterback prospects, guys, is has he ever talked negatively about any of these guys? Because I remember back in the day when he was talking about Johnny Manziel as the number 1 quarterback in that year's draft class. I remember how much he was hyping up Josh Johnson in his draft class and how much he really believed in him. And it's just like, I don't know if I've ever seen Jon Gruden actually talk negatively about a young NFL QB prospect. So first of all, that's just the first thing to get out of the way, is that he's kind of somebody that's a positivity broker, and he doesn't really deal with talking about the negatives in a player. But I would love for Gruden to be right about Will Howard, man. I really, really would, because if he's Josh Allen, we're getting a Josh Allen for the price of a 6th-round pick. I mean, sign me up for that, man, especially for a kid as good of a person, as good of a teammate as Will Howard is, man. He could be the face of this franchise, and if that happens and he's winning Super Bowls for this team, and, he's going toe-to-toe with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes for the next couple decades, and he's the next great Steelers quarterback, I would be absolutely thrilled with that. I'm just not sure if he has that caliber of upside that Jon Gruden seems to think that he has. But I will say this, and I've been saying this since the day the Steelers drafted Will Howard. I think he does have starting quarterback upside in the National Football League. I really do. He's got great size, like John points out. He is somewhat athletic. I don't think he's a dynamic rusher, but he can certainly run the ball in a little bit of a straight line. He's more of a straight line kind of athlete than somebody that's going to make you miss in space, like a Lamar Jackson, for example. He's got a big arm, can throw the ball down the field. He's got a good mind, all those different things. Like, all those things are valid points about Will Howard, and those traits combined, give him the upside of an NFL starting quarterback. But like I said, guys, I don't think the upside is as high as Jon Gruden thinks. Like, he's comparing him to Josh Allen, who is like one of the greatest super weapons at the quarterback position we have ever seen in the National Football League. And when I watched Will Howard on tape at Ohio State, I saw somebody that was more of the kin of like a Derek Carr, somebody that's kind of like a mid-level starter, somebody that, can throw the ball down the field, good size. By the way, Jon Gruden, big Derek Carr fan as well, by the way. He was a huge Derek Carr guy. I just feel like Will Howard is more of that kind of quarterback at his upside, where he could get to that point where he's a pretty decent mid-level starter that you can win games with. If you can put a great supporting cast around him, you might even be able to compete for a Super Bowl. But Derek Carr never even won a playoff game in the National Football League, and a part of the reason for that is that he is a limited quarterback, and I do think even at his upside, Will Howard is also a limited quarterback because he just doesn't bring the playmaking instincts, the out-of-structure playmaking ability, and the dynamic rushing ability that all the top guys in the league bring. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, all these guys bring some really crazy stuff after, outside of structure, and I just don't see that on Will Howard's film from Ohio State. Now, could it always develop? Yeah, maybe, but I think if you're banking on that at this point, I think, that's a pretty foolish way to go about constructing an NFL football team. And in a loaded AFC where he's going to have to compete against the Burrows and the Lamars and the Mahomeses and now the Drake Mays, it's like, I just don't know if Will Howard on a second contract making $60+ million per season is going to be able to compete with those guys. And, for the people that say, well, after this year, Rodgers will retire and then we can start Will Howard. I mean, at that point, we likely won't see Will Howard at all at that point, even in the preseason. And then you're at risk of putting yourself in a situation that the Minnesota Vikings are in, where the Vikings really went all in to try and win a championship this year. And they went with a quarterback that was completely unproven, a first-round pick in J.J. McCarthy, and he is not up to snuff. That team is not a Super Bowl contender with J.J. McCarthy under center this year, and the Steelers could be putting themselves in a very similar situation. I mean, they could figure out, the wide receiver situation. They could completely fix the O-line. They could have the defense playing at a top 3 level. It wouldn't matter. If Will Howard is a pumpkin and he stinks, you have no chance of winning a Lombardi trophy, whereas if you bring back Aaron Rodgers for another season or you bring in another veteran quarterback or something of that kind, you might have a chance to actually compete for a championship in 2026. And listen, man, maybe things will go to hell this year and Aaron Rodgers just sucks the rest of the way and the team gets out of playoff contention and, Will Howard gets an opportunity to play this year and he gets his shot. And if that happens, if he plays well, I do have an open mind with going with Will Howard in 2026 if he proves this year that he can be a good player and can produce at the NFL level. But I do think at this point, guys, whether Jon Gruden or whether this fan base likes it, the most likely scenario is that Pittsburgh's going to draft a quarterback early in the NFL draft next year. They have a ton of draft capital as well as a 2027 first-round pick at their disposal. They've got, the ammo to trade up for a quarterback in the first round if they really fall in love with somebody. And, if they are within striking distance of getting somebody that they believe can be their legitimate next franchise quarterback, I think Omar Khan is going to pull the trigger on that, and maybe Will Howard can be the team's long-term backup, or maybe if the guy they trade up for stinks, he gets an opportunity and he plays well. But, the chances as a sixth-round pick quarterback, they're pretty slim. And I just don't know if the Pittsburgh Steelers are actually going to give him the opportunity to be this team's franchise quarterback. But also, man, I am open to passing on a quarterback in next year's NFL draft as well. If Rodgers wants to come back and he says, hey, man, this Will Howard guy, give him another year to learn behind me. He can be your guy. Maybe the Omar Khan and the Steelers do hold off drafting a quarterback for another year if that's the case. And they go out and get a wide receiver or an offensive guard or a cornerback in the first round next spring. There's a lot of different things that could happen at this point in time. And absolutely, I think that Aaron Rodgers could be Will Howard's kind of biggest champion. And if he recommends to Omar Khan and to Mike Tomlin, obviously Omar and Mike respect Aaron Rodgers and his opinion quite a bit. If Rodgers goes to them and says, hey, man, this Will Howard guy, he's got to be your next starting quarterback, I think that the Steelers will certainly take that into account. So at this point, it's just too early to know what's going to happen with a guy like Will Howard. I think that he could be a starting level quarterback in this league if he properly develops, but I do question A, if he's even going to get the opportunity before the Steelers draft another quarterback, and B, if he does pan out, will he be good enough to, give that second contract to of $60+ million per season to compete with the league's greats here in the AFC. So what say you guys? Let me know down there in the comment section. Will Howard be our next franchise quarterback here in Pittsburgh? Give me a yes or a no down there in the comment section for today's pinned question. Just a second here. I'm going to tell you about our sponsor today at Prize Picks. And while I tell you about Prize Picks, simply give me a yes or a no down there in the comments. And with that, let's have a word from our sponsor today at Prize Picks. And the hard-hitting football action this season is just getting started, and it's even better with our friends at Prize Picks. The weather might be changing outside, but the feeling of being right never gets old, folks. So keep the season rolling on with Prize Picks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. Prize Picks is super simple to play. Just pick more than or less than on at least 2 player stat projections. If you get your picks right, you could cash in. On Prize Picks, how you play is up to you. If you want flexibility, choose the flex play where you can get paid even if one of your picks misses. And if you really know ball and you want the bigger payouts, go for the power play. No matter how you play, though, Prize Picks is a great way to put your takes to the test. Join millions of users and sign up for America's #1 fantasy sports app. So for this weekend's game against the Bengals, guys, I'm going to take the more on Aaron Rodgers passing yards. I think he bounces back this week. I'm taking the more on Jaylen Warren rushing yards, and I'm taking the less on Joe Flacco passing yards. I think the Steelers' defense plays a lot better this time around. Now, you guys can download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup on the Prize Picks app today. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. So speaking of this weekend's matchup versus the Cincinnati Bengals, I think that Pittsburgh Steelers defensive coordinator Teryl Austin should actually look to himself and learn a lesson from himself for how to beat the Bengals offense this week and how to shut down guys like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, at least to what degree it's possible, because those two guys are pretty special dudes. But, I think what he should do is he should actually go back to his first ever game that he was the defensive play caller for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that, of course, was back in 2022 in the season opener versus the Bengals in Cincinnati in the jungle, where it was a pretty impressive performance for the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, if you'll remember. Of course, that was the famous game where Minkah Fitzpatrick blocks the game-winning PAT. They go to overtime, and they end up winning that game. But you take a look at what the defense was able to do. I mean, they were on the field for a whopping 94 snaps in that game, both in regulation and in overtime, and they only gave up 20 points in those 94 defensive snaps. That is insane to be on the field that much and to give up that few points. Only 4.6 yards per play, just so you guys know, the lowest in the league this year is 5, and that's the Denver Broncos. This year, they're the #1 defense in the league in yards per play allowed this year on defense. The Steelers defense only allowed 4.6 yards per play to Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins that day, and they turned them over 5 times. They kept them in that ball game, and they won that football game for the Pittsburgh Steelers at the top of the 2022 campaign. And what the game plan looked like for Teryl Austin in his first ever game as this team's DC was they played a lot of Tampa 2. Now, they found a lot of creative ways to get there, all right? They weren't just playing static Tampa 2. They were starting in 1 high and going into the 2 high safety structure. They would move people out of different positions, all right? They would kind of do these rotations to kind of keep Joe Burrow thinking post-snap, and that's really what they did, a lot of post-snap rotation. So whether they were playing Tampa or whether they were playing quarters or whether they were playing cover 1 or cover 3, they were rotating after the snap to make sure the quarterback, Joe Burrow, had to confirm post-snap where to throw the football and what the actual coverage was. And then also, they didn't blitz a whole lot in that game. Now, they did have a couple of blitzes that worked very well. They were very well-timed blitzes from the Steelers defensive coordinator, Teryl Austin, but there wasn't a whole lot of them. They got home with just 4 quite frequently, and that's what they got to do in this game, in my opinion, okay? I think you got to play a lot more zone coverage than what you did the last time against the Cincinnati Bengals. I think you got to double Jamar Chase and do a good job making sure that he doesn't get those quick slants and drags and all these different routes that he was getting big yardage on after the catch in their first matchup. And then, doing the post-snap rotation stuff, stymieing the run game, doing all those things that you did in that 2022 game. I think that it's a lesson that Teryl Austin should certainly learn, and I think that they'll do that. They've looked a lot better the last 2 weeks, all right, after, the embarrassing performances versus Cincinnati and Green Bay. Over the last 2 games, against Indy and against LA, 2 quarterbacks that are playing pretty darn well, Daniel Jones and Justin Herbert. This defense looked a lot better. They were getting stops, all right? They were getting to the quarterback. This pass rush has been really good the last 2 weeks with just rushing 4. I think that, this defense has kind of turned over a new leaf since this team last played the Cincinnati Bengals. So I think, and it's my prediction, that this Steelers defense will play a lot better this week against the Bengals and Joe Flacco and Jamar Chase than they did back in Week 7. So who you got in this ball game? Let me know down there in the comment section. Type PIT for Pittsburgh or CIN for Cincinnati. Let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. For me, I'm taking the Pittsburgh Steelers to bounce back and win this one. Let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. Now, the last thing I want to talk about on today's show, guys, is that I do not think it is time to panic about Aaron Rodgers, okay? Because right now I'm seeing a lot on Steelers Twitter, oh, this guy's going to be 42 years old in like 16 days, and he's so old, and he doesn't want to take hits, and, he's just not the same guy, and all this different stuff. We got to bench him for Mason Rudolph. I mean, that's just a bunch of BS to me, guys. I think that, quarterbacks are allowed to have, one bad game without being, called washed or too old or that he can't play anymore. Rodgers in those first 8 games was pretty darn good for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I think that there is a reason to hope out there that Rodgers is going to be able to bounce back. The reason is, the other kind of older quarterback that went to a new team in his 40s and actually won a Super Bowl, Tom Brady, had a very comparable start to what Aaron Rodgers has done in the first half of his Steelers tenure. You guys can take a look at the first 9 games of Aaron Rodgers here in 2025 with the Steelers and Tom Brady with the Buccaneers back in 2020, and the numbers are very comparable. And the only reason why Brady has, almost 500 yards more than Aaron Rodgers is because he was throwing the ball a lot more than Rodgers is, all right? Their yards per attempt is actually very comparable, but, Rodgers and Brady right around the same in touchdowns, exactly the same in interceptions, right around the same in completion percentage, and that's just the surface level stats. But what I'm really interested in, guys, is the advanced stuff, the stuff that kind of goes, takes a peek behind the curtain and kind of shows us exactly how efficient these quarterbacks are playing. And you guys can see that these two quarterbacks are right around the same range in all of these key advanced metrics. All right, EPA per play, very similar. Success rates around the same rate. All right, and then the same rank in the National Football League. They both rank 16th at this point through their first 9 games with their new teams in completion percentage over expected. And then their passer ratings, very similar rankings as well. Aaron Rodgers was actually a little bit higher than Tom Brady's. And remember, Brady ended up going on to win the Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and defeating Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs at the height of their powers in order to do it. And, another thing that is very comparable between Rodgers and Brady is that in their 9th game, all right, it's kind of weird that it's the exact same game, but in their 9th game with their new teams was their worst game with those teams, all right? Tom Brady, I mean, you want to talk about looking old and looking like you can't play anymore, 0 touchdowns to 3 interceptions versus the New Orleans Saints, all right, just 5 yards per attempt and a quarterback rating of 40.4, all right? As bad as Aaron Rodgers was against the Los Angeles Chargers, at least he did throw a touchdown. One of his interceptions wasn't even his fault. It was on Calvin Austin III for dropping it, and his passer rating was 10 points higher than the GOATs in that particular scenario. And remember, sure, New Orleans had a good defense that year, but so do the Chargers, all right? These great level quarterbacks and, even the Hall of Famers, they can have bad games. And that's my message to Steelers Nation, is that one bad game does not mean that Aaron Rodgers is going to completely stink it up the rest of the way. And good QBs can have bad games. And, what makes these guys the best of the best and the best of all time is that they can bounce back from those bad games and play really well. And with the Steelers playing Cincinnati, a historically bad defense that's dead last in almost every single defensive category heading into the week, and then you get Chicago, another defense that's really struggling. I mean, the next 2 weeks, Aaron Rodgers could absolutely bounce back from that and get this offense back on the right track as we head down the home stretch of the 2025 season. So let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section. What is your confidence level in Aaron Rodgers bouncing back this week versus the Cincinnati Bengals? Put it on a scale of 1, meaning he's going to be terrible this week, he's going to stink it up again, to 10, meaning he's just fine, he's going to play great, he's going to have one of his best performances of the year. Let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. That'll be it for today's edition of Steelers News and Rumors. We're going to have more Steelers coverage for you guys tomorrow leading up to our Week 11 game here versus the Cincinnati Bengals on Sunday afternoon. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Till next time, guys, here we go, Steelers.